And I think this is a topic that touches many of us who are in this field, where we can really feel deep inside our bodies how the ways we were wounded in our very early years, the way we developed into this world, deeply influences how we can show up in this world. And that in order to show up fully with our potential, that we also need to become very, very intimate and compassionate with ourselves. So I'm delighted today that we could invite my dear colleague and friend Tobias Konermann to be with us tonight and to share with us on this topic. And I'll just say a few words about Tobias, and then Tobias will be leading us into an attunement today. He'll be sharing with us. There'll be space for questions later towards the completion of the call. And yeah, while I share, and also in the next moments, I also want to invite you all to bring yourself into the chat if you like, and you can just share how you're showing up here tonight. What is alive in you as you arrive here? Any questions that you bring, or simply which part of the world you're coming from. So lovely to just hear your voices in this quiet way coming into the chat. So Tobias Konermann is a clinical psychologist and licensed psychotherapist practicing in Berlin, in Germany. And he teaches at several institutes for psychotherapy and is also specialized in working with developmental trauma. Tobias has developed maps for principles of process-oriented change and offers advanced training for psychotherapists and coaches. He has worked with Thomas Hübl for over 10 years and co-leads the Inner Science training group in the Academy of Inner Science, which is part of the Thomas Hübl field. And he's also part of the faculty for NARM training in Europe as a teaching therapist and supervisor. So that's it from my side. I think most of you know me. I'm Kosha, and I am involved in service through the Pocket Project. And I'm also just wanting to thank Melanie Petrak, who's here with us today, for translation into German. Also für euch, die deutsche Übersetzung brauchen, bitte geht auf den Übersetzung, auf den kleinen Globus, und dort könnt ihr Deutsch wählen. Genau, und Melanie wird für euch übersetzen. And also thank you to you, Ben, who's holding the technology for us in the background. Thanks. And huge gratitude to you, Tobias, for showing up here. We're delighted to be with you tonight. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kosha. And thank you for inviting me and doing this work. My memories from being here last time has a very warm echo still. It was and I'm just connecting back now to my last visit here, of course, with probably a few similar people, but also many new ones.
And as you say that, I think that one of the very beautiful things that's happening here is that this community of practice that we're building is really maturing and growing over time, and we're deepening as we travel together. So it's lovely to also have that feedback from you.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so how to get started? I guess maybe the technique can still help me, that I don't just see myself. How I arrange this here.
Tobias, you can choose gallery view for yourself from the view menu, and it won't affect what anyone else sees.
Perfect. Thank you. So that's really nice. Now I can see you and drop in together. Give myself the same chance as you, just to arrive here a little bit. And like I always like to start with giving a bit, putting in context what we are about to talk about at the presence, or what we're about to do. And so the context that's probably good to know about me is that my field of experience or expertise is really more in the therapeutic realm and around developmental trauma. I'm much less experienced, outspoken probably about social activism, and also maybe not, the main voice in telling what is a wise way to be in crisis. But I'm certain that there are certain principles that we see in working with developmental trauma in individual settings, just in terms of principles that apply to bigger movements of collective and social crisis and change. Because that's in a way this beautiful thing about these principles. If we orient to these underlying or deeper principles, if they are true, they work in every context. And my hope for us is that my experience from the clinical and the process-oriented view of working with developmental trauma can just maybe be a bit of a creative window in how we look at being in or with crisis, and what is this thing we call agency, to unravel or unfold a bit this term. What is our understanding of that? And we talk about that, at least I, and maybe many of you too, from a position of being outside of hot trauma or conflict zone. This mixture of feeling involved, caring, but also not in the immediate fire of having to deal with that day to day, with that existential intensity. So maybe many of us, but maybe, for sure not all of us, share this perspective of having the luxury of the possibility of being able to take a break from the intensity of what crisis or polycrisis means in the actual day-to-day of people's lives. So this call is not about how to feel more agency in the middle of the fire of an immediate traumatizing circumstance like the many that are going on at the moment. But it's more how we as people who feel involved, but not in the immediacy of it, can feel a sense of wholehearted participation and agency in it. And then I will say more what I mean by agency. So that's a bit of a context for me and for the theme. And then, of course, we are the context for tonight. So you are here.
And Tobias, maybe just to acknowledge that we do have people from Colombia, from Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, so that this case of, it might not be the case for everyone. And I think it's just really helpful that you contextualize where you're coming from and the knowledge that you're bringing tonight. And we trust that this is helpful and supportive for everyone here, and acknowledge that not everyone might be in outside of acute traumatic areas as we speak here. Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, I'm grateful for you bringing it in that way. And that's the first example, I think, of how to give a context to what we bring and where the places we don't see because we live in the in where we live. I appreciate you bringing in the bandwidth of people sitting here around this campfire tonight. And I would like to give us a moment of presencing, kind of being here before we start into the theme. And if you have your camera off, that's totally fine. If you want to have it on just for a few minutes to do the following exercise, that's also good. But do it in that whatever way it fits for you right now. But I would like to invite you just to have a few moments of going through the pictures here, which correspond to real people, and just give yourself a moment of curiosity to see who's here. Maybe you've done that already. I have not. And for now, just settle with one face. Doesn't matter which face that is, just see if you can sit for a moment with one face you see here on the screen. And my invitation is to presence and take a moment how it is to probably without even that person knowing that you are now, being with him or her. Just how it is to land in that kind of space. With this one person. If that at all changes anything for you, maybe it's relaxing or adds additional excitement or both. And just move to one other face if you would like. Totally different person. And really, it's not about asking yourself anything about who that is or what's happening over there. It's just landing with this particular specific relational space, one person. And then see how it is to bring your attention to mainly to yourself, but being aware that you're anyhow sitting here in this field of us, this group, community call. And the difference when you give yourself permission to really bring awareness to how you sit here. And you can do that with open, with closed eyes, whatever is your preference. Maybe your day is beginning, maybe ending. Just see whatever background ripples or are still there from where you come from right now, or also maybe what's the environment you sit in. And So we can kind of give ourselves the possibility to collect all the parts that are maybe already here, or maybe a few still scattered along the way of the day. That speaks to you. You can also, give your body a chance, a possibility to drop into your sitting here. And I'd like to invite you to connect to the motivation or the intention that brings you to this call and that makes you prioritize this time and space for being here. So what interest or what kind of pull or motivation, whatever word speaks more to you, brings you to this event? And how is it to include that there's probably quite some similarity in these shared intentions and motivations that come here together, kind of building a carpet for our space tonight, or maybe a roof, whatever, however it shows up in you. And then slowly, like to include these people here, maybe even the screen, and connect back to the space and this group here. And so I really encourage you and invite you for tonight that you know, if it's interesting what you hear, great. If there are passages where you feel like you're trying to effort to keep up with the content, or just see how you can have your own state also within your awareness. And we all, tend to become hypnotized on content, including me. And it's good to include us and the state we're in, and maybe, it feels nice to bring your eyes away from the screen and just listen, or have it closed or open, to just take care of, have a good time tonight. And I try to do the same for me. And I would like to start off the topic of the intention with the title kind of developmental crisis, developmental trauma and agency in times of crisis. So the reason why Kosha and I thought it would be interesting to bring these two together, times of crisis, developmental trauma, is, for one, developmental trauma quite profoundly shapes our motivational landscape. What we feel we need to do. It influences our wanting, what we believe we want. And it also influences whether our wanting, what we believe we want, and what we actually need are going in the same direction. And the question, how do we recreate the past? And how do we invite a more restorative future is a burning question for working with developmental trauma and for crisis. And I think there are common principles with recreation of crisis and recreation of life themes in an individual person that is fueled by dynamics of developmental trauma. And agency is such a central element in both of these realms. And my intention or my hope for tonight is that in the best case, we would leave with a maybe more integrative, broad understanding of that term agency, and maybe even a more humble perspective on it. That is not just being in charge, free choice. You know, we use this word being a transformative agent. I think we all would like to be a transformative agent, but that can also come along with we are the one who are impacting the change, and there's much more to agency that I would like to expand on tonight. That it can have a receptive or relational quality to it, and that I think is interesting to unfold a bit together. So when you look up the definition of agency, even in the psychological literature, you often find it in connection with a subjective sense of control. Me being the agent who's initiating and executing, who's choosing and who's executing my behavior. And I think that much of our notion of agency, and even in psychological literature, also comes from a paradigm of separateness. So in a paradigm of separateness, autonomy and control is the holy grail. When we are separate, control makes sense. We are the one doing it. But in a paradigm of interconnectedness, that concept can be ineffective or cause harm if we reduce it just to that. So if we reduce agency to I am the doer, and here I see my impact of change. That's a super important element of it. We all need the sense of being impactful and seeing that we make a change. And it's developmentally very important for children to move through that phase. But if we reduce it to that, there's a high chance to get stuck in that. Especially when we deal with polycrisis and we orient to where do we see our impact. If that becomes the orientation, this can easily spiral into more and more helplessness, or more and more a sense of lack of control, lack of participation. So I'm kind of interested in what means agency in that paradigm of separateness, and what means agency in a paradigm of interconnectedness, where it's not so clear, am I the one doing it? Is the change happening immediately? Is it maybe more subtle or showing up in ways that I don't even know where my impact is, coming to fruit? So to be open to have a bit more of a broad notion of what that could mean. Often agency is related to the notion of choice. I can choose. And what for me is very interesting in individual psychotherapy is that, and I know this from both chairs, I know this from the client's chair and from the therapist's chair, that when you imply choice, when there's no sense of choice on the other side, that leads to self-shaming, self-pressuring, and to basically more and more helplessness. So to hold that assumption that we choose how we want to feel today, or there are many examples of that, where we assume or we even demand on ourselves we should have choice here. And if not, we maybe just don't dig deep enough, or we haven't done enough therapy yet, or we maybe are not powerful enough, not courageous enough, or maybe we don't feel worth it enough, and that's why we don't fight hard enough. All these notions that could come into play. If we feel we should have a choice, where in certain places, by definition, in developmental trauma, we don't feel choice. And that agency can also mean to align with somebody else in a related way around my sense of a lack of choice. So that somebody sits with me in my experience that, yeah, I would wish to feel different. Yeah, I would wish to look different at myself. I would wish to be more compassionate, but for some reason, I can't right now. And that can be presenced in a space without pushing for a better version of us. I think that's a powerful example of a very different notion of agency. When we don't see agency as we are doing something here, and oh, here's the effect, but that agency is we take ourselves fully in to the experience. We're fully participating. And I just want to give you a moment, you know, maybe to let it sink in or to reflect how, if or how that speaks to you when I talk about choice, or maybe moments of choice or lack of choice, and whatever you can find in yourself to give yourself some time to, if that sounds familiar, or maybe you even have reference experiences where that could be acknowledged without a push for change. Now I want to relate what I say to developmental trauma in specific more. So how do we recreate the past? By confusing positive future projections with real visionary power. When we follow a projection, that is based on not wanting to be in the uncomfortableness of some experience, we tend to recreate what we want to get away from. And I think that goes individually and collectively equally. So when we apply that to development of a child or developmental trauma, then it's now very simplified, but also we just have this little time, but in a very simplified way, we could say developmental trauma forces children into a false sense of autonomy in developmental stages that are actually wired for dependence. So developmentally, where it would be natural to rely on being dependent, you recruit faculties of yourself and try to deal with it on your own and become more autonomous than you actually developmentally are. And that gives you at least a sense of orientation and control in a situation that is really not so controllable. So what I find important to consider is that whatever developmental trauma, it is we experienced, and we all experienced elements of it, there are two mechanisms that always come into play. And the one is you need to disconnect from essential parts of your self-expression. That goes with shame, because you feel deficient, or you feel you lack something, or that disconnecting from parts of ourselves, it goes with a sense of shame. And we need a solution for that, or a compensation, and that is a projection of a different self-image. So the remedy for the shame is an orientation to become this different, more loved, more accepted person. And that becomes an orientation for my development. And that's the moment where what I believe I want for myself, but also, you know, for me being in the world, starts to drift apart from what I need. The more I follow what I think I want, the less resourced I feel, the more it costs effort, and the less sustainable it feels. Because when we are met, when we are held, when we are being attuned to, all in these areas, our will, our wanting is connected to our needs. When we follow our impulses in the world, that doesn't come with a cost like that. It doesn't need to be separated from something. So then as adults, we orient towards an agenda of self-development that is actually not based on something we really aspire wholeheartedly to be, but it's more to get away from something we actually feel ashamed of. So it becomes an orientation for change that rides on emotional avoidance. It's not that we want to be that person, it's we don't want to be that sad or dependent or needy person. And every goal that is based on emotional avoidance is impossible to fulfill. It can't be reached. And that's so important to understand. Every goal that is based on avoidance can never be fulfilled. Because we might manage today not to get ridiculed, or not to be criticized, or to be accepted. But what about tomorrow? Okay, this was now okay, I managed. I came along well. But tomorrow the race starts again, because that place we really, really don't want to experience because it's so coupled with shame. That force that brings us away from there makes an impossible agenda. And for me, that's very helpful to understand, is that every part, even if it's a very, lightful image of a better world or of a better version of ourselves, if that comes from that place of being left in an alone place without the possibility for healthy dependency, we recreate exactly what we want to avoid. And Thomas would use different words. Thomas uses the words wishful thinking is based on absence, and visionary power is based on presence. So a sense of a better future that is really comes from a sense that I have when I connect deeply, that is born from presence and that has a lot of power. And it carries a true future possibility that I can feel now. And that's different from our ideals of a better self or of a better world that rides on that process of avoidance, of a certain emotional area of us that we feel is either not acceptable or we reject or we shame. So yeah, I just also give us a short moment to sit with whatever, you know, whatever is moving in you, and also, you know, always feel free to share it in a chat or give just space to it in your own reflection. So I think what's valuable and really supportive to understand is that every projection exists because there is a gap of self-contact. Positive and negative projections live in a space of a gap, of a vacuum of self-connection, where I feel myself, I can perceive. Where I don't feel myself, I fill in the blanks. And that's such a powerful mechanism that no one of us is free of, and that is so subtle. And it can come with the, you know, most genuine, lightful, positive wishes for us or ourselves. And sometimes when we look really closely, and it's usually difficult to do that alone, we find that maybe something else is happening here. And in NARM, we call these, you know, strategies of the survival styles. The strategy of the survival style, where you kind of effort to be this more. They're called pride-based identification or strategy. You know, just try to be like that more. But that's just because you really don't want to be like that. Not because there's an actual choice. And how you can differentiate these two ways of moving with our motivation in the world is that when you follow one of these projective ideas or strategies, whether it's a project you want to bring into the world or whether it's in your partnership or for yourself, it costs effort. And we justify that effort by telling ourselves the ends justify the means. It's difficult, it doesn't feel nice, but if we just go for it, it's worth it because we want to arrive there. So the ends justify the means. And I think that's something where it's really supportive to get mindful around when we catch ourselves being in that logic. Because when we are connected with the developmental impulse, a motivation that's connected to our core sense of self, walking in that direction feels right from moment zero. It's worth it after 5 minutes of walking into that direction. It doesn't matter if it takes us 5 years or 1 hour or 10 years to get there. And that's for me fascinating to see in individual work with people, that when you align around a congruent developmental impulse you have, in that minute, it doesn't matter where you are on the ladder of progress. Even if you will have to deal with that theme your whole life. But moving in that direction feels right. So the process of walking actually becomes more interesting than where you think you need to arrive. And I think that's very helpful to apply to projects or to change making. And I don't want to say these processes are without tension. They are without effort. And that's an important distinction. There's a lot of tension in evolution happening and stretch, and it's uncomfortable and feel afraid and we're shaking. And there's a lot of tension all the time, but there's some tension that is really worth it. And we can feel it, but because there's a sense of congruence in our willingness to be in exactly that tension. And that's a very powerful moment of agency. We might even feel very afraid, very challenged, walking on thin ice, but it's the right orientation, because in our resonance with our deeper selves, we have we sense, yeah, that's it. So there is no if-then logic. It's just I'm doing it because I want to do it right now. It's not I do it, yeah, and I know, but we need to get there, so let's just keep walking. Every strategy needs to do a lot of effort to zone certain perceptions out. And that's where it starts, that we can get trapped in this logic where the ends justify the means. We have to keep certain things out of our experience, because if we would let them come, we might feel like that there's something else here that is important to give ourselves to. I'm just taking a moment because I talked a lot now, and so give myself and you a bit of moment to see how that all lands or lands not.
Maybe I could bring a question to the last bit that you just shared, Tobias, because I'm also just seeing Isabel writing, wow, that seems unattainable. And I was just thinking, like in my personal life with the Pocket Project, where I feel extremely aligned in the work that I do. And yet it feels like I'm constantly navigating this, it's like not, oh, I'm aligned. And then, how did you say, every tension I feel feels worth it? There's a sense of effortlessness. Not at all. That is not my experience, but it's more like a navigation, a constant navigation to come closer to alignment, to notice where efforting has taken me away from alignment, to come back. It's like, it feels like a meandering river You know, none of us are enlightened. None of us are 100% aligned, right? So that kind of softening of the beauty of what you just brought to us. That's
Exactly.
where I like
And no, I'm grateful you bring that in. And I find that every time we talk about these orienting principles that certainly have a truth to them, it's also always an invitation that it gets caught by our pressuring ourselves into more perfect versions of embodying that. And so I'm glad you bring that in.
Yeah, or the idea that this insight, you know, this will solve it all for me. Now it will be easy.
Right.
And I just, yeah, and I think it's beautiful, you know, what you brought about this, yeah, the closeness to the experience. It's the very intimate closeness to the actual experience. And I guess the other thing, you know, when you said this, where I feel myself, I can perceive, and where I don't feel myself, I fill in the blanks. That's another place where I just felt like that's so precious. As you said, that's a place, if we understand that deeply, it's life-changing. And whether you could maybe say a bit more to that, because I feel it's a very precious.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think I mean, first of all, to have the humility that we really don't know when we project and when not. And there's absolutely no way of knowing that, and for sure not beforehand. And that I think there is where the relational part comes in and where we need each other. That when we follow an impulse, it and dare to become visible with it. Doesn't matter whether it's a project or in the way I want to show up with the people around me. Sometimes it needs this step of showing up with it so that life and the relational spaces I'm embedded in can help me to understand where it needs a correction and where not. And so nobody can sort for him or herself out projections in a kind of a own self-guided way or therapeutic, isolated way. And I think that's whenever that question comes up, how do I know, or how do I make sure? That's the part where our needing each other comes in, and the relational corrections that happen. But in my experience, sometimes it's important to start walking first towards it, and to give ourselves to that process, and then see what's happening.
Yeah, beautiful. And it relates to what you said at the beginning about an agency that is more relational and comes from a place of listening rather than controlling. It's really like, yeah, that we don't know whether what we see is the cracks in the glass on my screen or whether what we see is reality. We don't know. We can only find out by, yeah, touching it, listening to it, looking again. Does it look the same? Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful
And
softening.
in that decision that you just described lies a good portion of agency, of a willingness to do that process. and to be receptive and to be listening to these signals, just to consciously kind of make yourself available for that and show up with the willingness to do that. I think that's already very, very beautiful act.
Right, and I do find that in the moments, right, there might be little signposts like, oh, I think I've been in a similar situation before. I recognize the dynamics here. That's often a great signpost to think, I'm not actually seeing clearly, because life doesn't repeat like that. It's like, so that's great to wake up and think, okay, this is, you know, this is a dream to wake up from. And how do I do that? What are the other informational pieces I could be listening to?
Right.
The other thing is this sense of slight inner confusion, which I also find very helpful. You know, when life doesn't just stream through and my next insight streams through and the communication is streaming, but there is a confusion. And it's beautiful how you keep slowing down with us tonight to really, move with us through with clarity. Hey, Tobias. I thought maybe we'll bring one question from the chat.
Yeah, great.
Okay, and this is from Steve Brown. So it's a bit, maybe might be out of your comfort zone. I'm not sure, but I also think it might be I see that others are also interested in, but whether you have an impression of how about the connection of these ideas to the macro levels of change or macro related change. And I do wonder, you know, if the imagination of how out of this our collective fields our societies are being created. And just as you feel into that, whether you could say a few words about that.
I will say a few words to it, how I see a potential connection. And there are maybe two main things that come to my mind. One is that I believe that institutions and structures that were built by compensatory impulses of wanting to move away from something, that they don't live sustainably. And I think, at least when I connect to a younger generation now, many of them feel the emptiness of certain institutions or structures of authority. And I think that plays into the challenge that we are facing. That certain structures we build don't feel filled with life, and maybe partly because of the motivational space where they were built from. And the other element is that this what I refer to as the if-then logic. There's this polycrisis going on, and actually we don't know, no one of us really know what's our individual relation to that. And I don't know how following my life stream will maybe be a puzzle piece for that crisis that's happening. But if I consider myself as being outside of that crisis and trying to help it or improve it, I easily get caught in this efforting for that kind of change. And I take myself kind of out of the equation, where my life is at, what really feels appropriate for me, what feels a congruent move in my life, just because it feels right for my life. And maybe the byproduct is that I'm being a transformative agent for something bigger. So there's something about the intimacy, how we hold our own life motivations, I find interesting. And exactly that intimacy with our deeper callings is overcoupled by developmental trauma. So it means that many resources we potentially have are not aligned in the way they could be. And then it's difficult to have many, more powerful vessels of being present to the situation. And I'm sure I'm not there are people who could answer this probably more skillful than me, but that's my extrapolation from the therapeutic work to how I see the situation.
Yeah, beautiful. And is it okay if I add one thought to that? Yeah, I just thought, like, also if we see how much potency is in individual absencing or acting from a place of wanting to get away from an experience, and then we multiply that onto the collective, how much potency there is in a collective wanting to get away from an experience and acting from that place, or acting from a place of absence. We understand how important collective trauma integration work is.
Right.
Yeah, beautiful. Right. Thank you so much.
So Kosha, let's see what the time says about I leave that up to you if we take another question, or we will come to a closing here.
I think the time says to come to a closing here. There's been incredibly beautiful questions coming in the chat. But also the call has been so rich and so deep, and in a way it would be, lovely to have a sequel next year. Next call with Tobias. We'll continue this journey, and maybe in other ways, but just to, from my side, to speak at a very, very deep appreciation to you and the care with which you took us on this journey. I really appreciated it, and I think everybody here did. And also the care in everybody who listened, and the richness of your comments and thoughts. So very much appreciating that. And I would love to offer the space to you to also, any sentences or thoughts that come to just really feel complete before we go to the announcements. Yeah, and you can drink it in, Tobias.
Yeah, I do my
Gratitude. It's also giving back to you, nourishing. Tobias, I was asking for any last words from your side, but if you feel complete, then it's good.
I just want to, say thank you to everyone here, and for the rich space, and for inviting me, Kosha. And I enjoyed being here, and it's
beautiful. Wonderful. You're part of the community here. And thank you to you, Melanie, for the translation. I also see it in the chat. And thank you, Ben, for your tech hosting, and huge thanks to you, Tobias. Be well, everyone. Be safe, be blessed. And sometimes, even when there is no miracles, grace might enter your lives. So may it come to you. Thank you, and be well.